Mabuhay, Kamusika, welcome. How are you? This is Bob from Love Beyond the Sea. Pacing yourself in looking for a Filipina wife. Some take their time in finding a wife. Some are very deliberate in anything. And others just move faster with their decisions. And that depends on a variety of individual factors. But we must evaluate which way God is calling us to go, because there's not a lot of rules and regulations for this, but you want to make a good decision. You'll have to examine the risk level, your own comfort level, how easily you can trust. Are you looking for the right things? The Bible is silent on the whole dating process, so we have liberty to go about this in any way that we think God is approving of. There are some principles, but no hard and fast rules, no right or wrong approach. However, I believe there is good and better to consider. Knowledge is the application of wisdom, so we need to ask God how we should conduct this search. And everybody's situation is going to be different for a multitude of reasons. So while I always say be aggressive in looking for a wife, you don't want to be desperate. Aggressive means you've identified what's important, what your needs are, how that can be addressed, and have a plan for where to find that, and then aggressively go out and pretty much not take no for an answer, and just go for it, go hard. And if there's an obstacle, you work around it. Desperate means you're not going to make good decisions, because you're not going to be rational. You're going to be rushing through the thought process. You just want to get married. You assume it will work out. So your thoughts aren't going to be in the right place. You're going to maybe pick the wrong person, marry too soon. Now, I got married as quick as anybody, and I might even say I was desperate, but that does not mean that I made a rash decision. And if you watch some of my videos, you'll know why I feel that way. So what worked for my wife and I was focusing only on each other and seeing how that went. That will speed things up. Now, I knew what I was looking for. I'd been alone a long time, and I didn't just sleep for 30 years. I studied marriage. I studied what I needed to do to be a good husband, what a good wife would look like. And I studied this until I wanted to throw it up, because I needed to actually do something about it, and I just couldn't find anybody. So if you identify a good one early on like I did, is there any reason to keep looking? Just because it can take years in America does not mean that it should or is going to take a long time in the Philippines. I know of two men who identified someone early on and went steady, so to speak, and only spoke to each other. They could have dragged it on and on and on. It's kind of fun talking to a Filipina online, but that's not what they wanted to do. They wanted to get married. If you feel that you need to know everything about this woman before marrying her, that could be a problem. How would you know when you had reached the point that you knew everything about her? I've heard people say that. You got to date for 2 or 3 years or more. Don't marry her until you know everything about her. Well, you can know what she discloses to you. Personally, I believe you really won't know them well until you are living with them in a committed relationship such as marriage, and you may never know everything about them. And I guess I've never understood know everything. How would I know I knew everything about them? And if they knew everything about me, they wouldn't want to marry me, because the more we know about each other, we peel back those layers and we begin to see some things that aren't so flattering, and that's just the way it is. We have to accept that in ourselves and in the other person, and try to change as best we can. Being married is going to put, as many of you know, is going to put you in new situations, and you'll just have to wade through those difficulties. The Bible talks about the troubles in the flesh that Paul said he would discourage us from. However, he was really talking to those people that had the gift of singleness, In other words, don't get married, you don't need to. You're not struggling with sexual sin, sexual temptation to sin. You don't need to marry. Stay single. But to everybody else, the Bible says to marry. So how long will it take you to build up a trust level? If you have been hurt badly in the past, for example, this part may take longer, but try to remember that at some point you just have to trust each other. And I have to admit, since I proposed to my wife in 18 days, we got married in 7 weeks and 5 days. I didn't know everything about her, but I did have a certain trust level that was good enough for me. And I took full responsibility. If I made a bad decision, that was my fault. If I didn't ask the right questions, that was my fault. I wasn't going to blame the woman that I hired, so to speak, that I proposed to, that I had a chance to interview, so to speak, to get to know. That's not her fault if something, if I learned something that I didn't like. I mean, you're just never going to know everything. I just feel strongly about that. If you want to know as much as you can, you'll just have to marry her. Now, I have learned to trust her. She has been trustworthy, and sometimes it just starts with the act of trusting each other and developing more trust on that trust that you have began with. I have learned things about my wife I didn't know about before we got married so quickly, and I expected that. The one thing I needed, though, was for them to be a Christian and build the relationship from that foundation. I am committed to her, so I will have to do some adapting, as will she. Even with someone you love, being in such close space will occasionally bring out the worst in each of you. Another thing to consider is how old you are when you are still actively pursuing a wife, and how much time you can afford to spend looking for her. I was 53. I know that felt like 153 when I finally found her and married her, because I had been alone for so long. And frankly, I felt I had a lot of ground to make up. I wasn't that old, but I wanted to enjoy as much of marriage as I could. I did not want to be 70, 75 years old and still be looking for a wife. I wasn't planning on getting married so quickly. After I became a paid member on Christian Filipina, I was open to whatever God wanted, and He wanted the search to end quickly. No doubt about it. In those 18 days before that we talked, then I proposed to her, it felt like 3 or 4 months. We talked a lot. The more you talk, the more you learn. About 4 hours a day, and that's made possible by maybe an hour, hour and a half in the morning before work, maybe 2.5 hours before bed, and because the times are inverted, morning here, evening there, and the reverse. Weekends we can talk some more, and we did. I just felt like I was ready to get married sooner rather than later because I knew what to look for. And although I was desperate in a way, I was not desperate to make a wrong decision after waiting so long. So I did what I had to do. I asked the right questions. I asked her to marry me. She said yes, and we got married. So I don't know your situation, but I was alone a long time, and I prayed. I studied marriage a lot, so I was hungry, and I felt I was ready. Didn't plan on getting married so quickly, but I'm glad I did. Another approach, of course, is to proceed slower, and you need to be comfortable with whatever approach. I am not advocating rushing. I'm not advocating being desperate. I'm not advocating that every Filipina that you meet would make a quality wife. You still have to ask questions. You still have to invest time. You still have to trust. And that may be the toughest part for most of us, is the trusting, because you can't spend a lot of time side by side because they could be 5, 6, 7, 8, 9,000 miles away from you. But you could go slower. You get to know a certain number of women and then pare them down. That's what I assumed I would be doing. It just didn't work out that way. Proceeding slower probably means seeing more than one woman in person. I mean, this could take several years if you do it this way. That's the way it happens in America. And I don't know, I would not carry that way over to the Philippines because I don't think it has to. So certainly all right to go slow. The whole process is like investing in the stock market. How much risk or perceived risk are you going to be comfortable with? Meeting more women first can help you to compare all of them, but then it makes it kind of hard to decide. Are there better ones still out there? Should I keep looking? Don't look for perfection. You're always going to find somebody that has just is maybe a little bit more positive in that way than some other people that you're considering. You take notes, you scratch your head, you pray about it, and it can be very frustrating, especially if your mindset is, there's only one person out there for me. You can't do that. There could be thousands of them for you, and I hope that relaxes you. I'll have a video on that too one of these days. On Christian Filipina, the dating site I found so many choices that if I wanted to, 3 years later, I think I could still be combing through various profiles and finding women that I liked and would think, boy, they might make me a good wife. But that's not the goal. The goal isn't to be communicating with as many. The goal is to get married. So I proposed, she accepted it, and we got married. Some guys are just more deliberate, and some guys are just, they take more chances, but we have to take well-conceived risks. I think our personalities come into play with this. I kind of tend to like to move faster, although with a wife you have to really think critically and make sure you make a good choice. But remember, to keep your eyes open for red flags. Take note of green flags, indications that she might be someone to marry. For example, that would be if they're punctual for your webcams. My wife was 5 minutes early, and of the 5 women or so that I talked to, she was the only one that was early, and I took note of that. And other things to look for would be if they've been consistent in what they've said. If you just remember them saying something one time and then they seem to contradict it, it could be because she's talking to other men, or it just could be that she's lying. She might have you mixed up with somebody else, and that does happen. So having the family around if she's at home is an advantage, I think, especially if they speak English. Watching her demeanor when you're talking to her is important. Does she seem distracted? Does she seem indifferent? Does she seem engaged? Is she happy? Is she cheerful? Those are things to look for. So try not to be too nervous or you might miss some of those signs. And of course, the most important thing, as my wife tries to distract me, is her relationship with the Lord. Another thing, are they working? Are they working? Because you're taking more of a chance if the Filipina has not worked before, because if she is working, you know she's probably being relied on by the rest of the family to provide for her. She's probably going to be unselfish because she needs to. And I think if you find someone like that, there's no reason to think that she's going to come to your country and all of a sudden forget how to be responsible. So if she's not working, that doesn't mean that she couldn't be this way, but you need to help your chances as much as possible. And finding somebody that's working, I think, is a real good thing. Do they seem overly anxious to leave the Philippines? Do they have a lot of negative things to say about the Philippines? That would be a red flag to me. And I don't suppose they're going to talk a lot about a green card or coming to your country, but if you kind of feel like they are, maybe file that one away. There's going to be conflict after marriage, of course. So a good indicator would be how the two of you deal with the conflict that arises before you're married. And that certainly can happen from a distance. It could be over the immigration process. It could be over, whether she does ask you for some money. I mean, who knows? It could be a lot of things. It could be a little bit of a language barrier. I don't know. But if you deal with things properly before marriage, and you're not struggling all the time, arguing half the time, that's also what you want to see. So pray, pray, pray. Ask for help in evaluating. I got my pastor to talk to my wife before we got married. That was both of our ideas. She wanted to right away. We set it up as soon as we could. They talked for about 40 minutes. He gave me his approval because we were going to get married in the Philippines, and that's what we did. So fast or slow, it will be exciting either way you pursue your love beyond the sea.